During the United States presidential election campaign, Donald Trump repeatedly said that he would not support a nationwide abortion ban. And this infuriated many committed Catholics, and understandably so. But on the day of the election itself, I put out a video urging Catholics to vote for Donald Trump, stating that they had good reason to do so based on Evangelium Vitae, a 1990s encyclical of Pope John Paul II, which said that legislators can support measures to restrict abortion, even though it not be an outright ban. And there could be all sorts of prudential reasons for doing so. And given that Donald Trump was proposing not to extend abortion rights compared to Kamala Harris, then it seemed the right thing to vote for him. The question remains, what will happen in the next 4 years? The Guttmacher Institute gives 10 fears about this. So I thought it'd be nice to go through them, just to see what that part of the degenerate world is thinking and fearing for the coming 4 years. The first point Guttmacher makes is that the Trump administration could block abortion access nationwide. And they say they can do this by use of the Comstock Act. And that would target medication abortion, which is available by post. Pills being sent to people by post. It could go so far as to effectively ban all abortion nationwide. Even the threat of enforcement would create a chilling effect for providers, who might halt provision if faced with potential criminalisation. An NBC article on the possible restrictions that the Trump administration might impose says that 65% of abortions in the United States are via this medical procedure. The article goes on to say, President-elect Trump, along with Secretary of Health and Human Services and political appointees within the US Food and Drug Administration, will likely direct that agency to severely restrict and potentially eliminate access to mifepristone, one of the drugs used in a common medication abortion regimen. It goes on to say that the federal government will likely stop enforcing the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labour Act's requirement that hospitals provide emergency abortion care to any patient who needs it. All that was in just point 1 of this article. Second point is the global gag rule, as Guttmacher calls it, could be reinstated and expanded. I quote, during his first administration, President-elect Trump reinstated the so-called global gag rule, a policy that prohibits US global health assistance from going to any non-US organisation that provides abortion care or referrals using its own non-US funds. He had expanded this policy to apply to all global health assistance, not just global family planning assistance, as was the case in prior Republican administrations. Point 3. Reinstating the domestic gag rule. I quote, President-elect Trump will almost certainly initiate rulemaking to reinstate the so-called domestic gag rule, implemented during his first term in office. The rule prohibited providers who are part of the federally funded Title X family planning program from referring patients for abortion care, among what they call other intentionally onerous requirements. The original rule in 2019 decimated the program's network of family planning clinics and constrained its ability to serve patients with low incomes. The fourth horrendous thing that Trump might do is undoing President Biden's protective administrative actions. They say, President Biden issued several executive orders and memorandums and took other actions to protect and expand access to reproductive health services. Expect the Trump-Vance administration to quickly nullify these efforts. It will likely dissolve the Interagency Task Force on Reproductive Healthcare Access, as well as the White House Gender Policy Council. And some other things it talks about. But you get the drift. The next point Guttmacher on its website makes is a bit hysterical, but I suppose it's to be expected in these dark days for the liberal left. Trump could appoint anti-abortion leaders and advocates to influential government positions, particularly in the US Department of Health and Human Services, where they will be able to heighten dangerous rhetoric and increase stigma around reproductive health care. Number 6 is reversing protections against discrimination. Not discrimination against the little one in the mother's uterus. This is discrimination against those who are carrying these children. The Trump advance administration will likely mimic the first Trump presidency by countering measures that protect individuals seeking health care from discrimination, including those who have previously received abortion care and LGBTQI+ individuals. Next, attacking the Affordable Care Act's birth control benefit. Expect the incoming administration to reprise efforts to undermine the Affordable Care Act's contraceptive coverage guarantee. The administration will likely again allow employers and educational institutions to avoid offering coverage in their employees' or students' health plans by claiming moral and religious exemptions. Well, just to interject, you know that's going to be quite important for the Catholic Church. 8. Threatening sexual and reproductive health and rights globally. The Trump-Vance administration will likely nominate anti-sexual and reproductive health and rights advocates as special representatives, envoys and ambassadors to conduct US foreign policy. Expect them to influence the drafting of UN resolutions and reports, policy statements and technical literature with language that assails gender equality, curtails human rights and degrades SRHR globally. Also anticipate the administration to block funding for the United Nations Population Fund, as it did during President-elect Trump's first term, and jeopardise funding for international family planning and reproductive health through US global health programs and the Economic Support Fund. 9. Eliminating access to gender-affirming care for minors. My gosh, I just have to say the language these people use and what it really means. Anyway, President-elect Trump has explicitly laid out some of his plans to eliminate access to gender-affirming care for minors. He has threatened to block physicians who provide this care to minors from receiving federal funding from Medicaid and Medicare, and to have the Department of Justice investigate the provision of gender-affirming care. His administration could also reverse the Biden-Harris administration's recent Title IX regulations, which strengthen protections for transgender students, but are currently blocked in approximately half of US states. And finally, number 10 of the top 10. Defunding Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood clinics receive reimbursement from Medicaid, Title X and other publicly funded programs for providing such care as contraception, STI screenings and treatments, and cancer screenings. The Trump-Vance administration would likely encourage states to defund Planned Parenthood by making Planned Parenthood affiliates ineligible to receive reimbursement from Medicaid and other publicly funded family planning programs. The administration could also attempt to issue a federal regulation making providers that offer abortion care, such as Planned Parenthood, ineligible for federal Medicaid funding, which would impact family planning services and other care availability nationwide. So you can see how thoroughly naffed off they are. But all praise to Jesus, a president that's done something that Nixon and Reagan never did, nor Bush, appointed really conservative Supreme Court justices that got rid of that ridiculous pretense that there's a constitutional right to abortion since 1973. Now, we not only have President Trump, but hopefully, if he carries working people in the same way Trump has done, then President Vance for 8 years after that. And President Vance would be maybe the first truly Catholic president. President Kennedy, God bless him, God rest his soul, was a bit of a Jack the Lad. And we know Biden is one of the Prince of Darkness's associates. So, but Vance is actually a Catholic, an actual convert. And heaven knows what would await us if God gives the nation time. You know, my view is, if you watch me, I'm pessimistic. I think time's running out. But if God gives time, if the leaders of the United... I went to the leaders of Europe. My gosh, what a disappointment, the whole lot of them, especially our gang in Downing Street. But if the leadership of the United States can act wisely with the Russians, with the Chinese, and especially get those Israelis under control, and that's the toughest nut to crack, given the structure, given the tentacles of the octopus that are wrapped around the neck of the United States. But if they can, then they might be long enough to effect a real renaissance in the USA. And on this side of the Atlantic, we do nothing but cheer. And then we could hope that instead of, as in from 1941 onwards, US troops came here as part of an eventual landing in Europe, they could come here as an invading force to liberate us. Oh well, there's my little bit of treason out the way.